Part 1. The Birth of Control. The night settled over the small town like a heavy coat, thick with the kind of silence that hides more than it reveals. In one narrow house at the end of a dirt road, a boy sat very still on the edge of his bed, hands pressed flat against his knees. Downstairs, a belt snapped against the air. A man's voice rose and fell, hard and sharp, then dropped into the steady murmur of a prayer. The boy listened to both sounds at once and learned a lesson he would never forget. In this house, pain and holiness walked together. His name was Herman, and from the very beginning, the world taught him that love could arrive wrapped in punishment. His father believed discipline was proof of righteousness. His mother believed forgiveness could erase what the belt had done. Between them, the child learned to keep his face blank and his breathing quiet. Every tear that slipped out brought another lecture, another warning about sin, another reminder that weakness invited judgment. At school, Herman was quiet and precise. Teachers praised his handwriting and his memory, but the other children kept their distance. Something in his eyes made them uneasy. It was not cruelty, it was calculation. While they shouted across the yard and chased one another through dust and sunlight, he watched them the way a doctor watches patients, the way a scientist watches insects in a jar. He saw who flinched when scolded, who lied without blinking, who forced a laugh when insulted. The world became a study in human reactions. One afternoon, older boys cornered him behind the schoolhouse. They mocked his serious face and tidy clothes. One of them shoved him against the wall and pressed a dead animal into his hands, a small creature they had killed for fun. They expected him to panic, to drop it, to cry out. Instead, Herman stared at the lifeless body. The fur was still warm. The glassy eyes reflected his own. There was no breath, no movement, but there was a strange calm in the weight of it.
You deserve this. Why
That
are
night,
you
while the
crying?
house slept, he took the animal down to the cellar.
So funny. Look at me.
The
It's
space smelled
hilarious.
of dirt and coal, the air cool against his skin. He laid the small body on a wooden crate and looked at it under a flickering lantern. His hands did not shake. He had watched enough
scared.
farm butchering to understand where the joints bent, where the skin gave way.
Maybe we should
When the
teach
knife
him a
slid
lesson.
in, he felt not horror but an almost soothing order. Everything inside the creature obeyed a pattern.
Trust me.
Bones connected in logical ways. Organs sat exactly where they should. Above him, the house creaked inside, but down here there was only breath, light, and the soft, wet sound of separation. In the quiet of that cellar, the boy discovered something no adult had ever given him: a sense of control. Years passed. The
Hey,
belt
Herman,
still
you
swung.
scared?
Prayers still
You look
soaked the
scared?
walls. Herman grew tall, his features sharpening into a handsome mask. When he spoke, his voice carried a measured warmth that made people lean closer. He learned how to answer questions without revealing anything. He learned how to smile in a way that reassured adults and disarmed suspicion. Inside, the same cold curiosity worked constantly, cataloging reactions, weaknesses, desires. Medicine offered the perfect path. Study the body, understand its secrets, dress the pursuit in respectability. He read anatomy texts with a kind of hunger, tracing diagrams with his fingertips, remembering the cellar and its brief, perfect silence. Professors saw a promising student. Classmates saw a charming future doctor. Herman saw instruments, opportunities, and a world that could finally be rearranged according to his design. In the growing city of Chicago, ambition rose with the smoke from factory chimneys. Railways cut through the land like veins. New money poured in, bringing investors, businessmen, families, strangers seeking fortune. To them, the city was a promise. To him, he adopted a new name, one that sounded distinguished, educated, trustworthy. To patients and neighbors, he became Dr. Holmes, a man who knew how to ask the right questions and offered just the right smile. He understood that people
Above
wanted
him,
to
the
believe
house
in a certain
creaked
image of
inside.
themselves.
Down
They
here,
wanted to be seen
there
as
was only
clever,
the brief,
successful,
perfect
special.
silence.
All he had to do was reflect that image back at them, and doors opened without resistance. The idea for the building came slowly, then all at once. At first, it was a simple boarding house near the site of a grand exposition, a sensible business plan in a crowded city. But as Holmes sketched and erased and sketched again, the walls on the page began to curve into something else. Corridors bent at strange angles. Staircases stopped abruptly at blank walls. Rooms connected to nothing. Other rooms sealed tight.
I assure
He
you,
spoke
Mr.
to
Davies,
contractors
this
with
venture is
polite
sound.
firmness,
We
changing
shall all
builders
prosper
often,
handsomely
never
from
letting
this
any
small
one man
arrangement.
understand the whole design. Each crew thought the previous one had made errors. Each assumed someone else had approved the oddities. Holmes nodded, paid wages, and stood alone at night in the half-finished hallways, listening to the echo of his footsteps. The structure felt less like a business and more like an instrument, a machine waiting to be activated. Gas lines were hidden behind plaster. Trapdoors were disguised as storage spaces. Chutes were built that dropped straight to the basement, where brick and iron waited in patient silence. On the blueprints, it all looked like eccentricity. In his mind, it resolved into one perfect equation. No witness, no trace,
To most,
no risk.
it is a promise.
To landlords and
But to me,
suppliers, Holmes was
it
the
is
ideal
raw
tenant.
material for
Rent
my
arrived on
designs.
time. His voice
My
stayed calm
sincerest
under
apologies
pressure.
for the wait, sir.
When delays
Now, tell
happened,
me
he
precisely
smoothed
where
them
the
over with
discomfort
jokes
lies.
and graceful
And ladies,
apologies.
don't you worry, we have just the thing
Behind
to
the
brighten
pleasant
your
tone
day.
lived a cold arithmetic. Every favor granted, every debt extended, every handshake was another string he could pull later. The day the building finally opened, the street outside was busy with visitors and carriages. Signs promised comfortable rooms and convenient services. Light spilled from the front windows, warm and inviting. Inside, carpets softened footsteps, and polished surfaces reflected a respectable, welcoming business.
The idea for
No
the
one
building
looking at the
came
gleaming
slowly,
front desk or the
then
neatly
all
framed
at once.
certificates would have guessed how carefully the hidden spaces had been planned. Holmes stood in the lobby, adjusting a cufflink, watching the first guests arrive. Travelers, salesmen, young women looking for work. They crossed the threshold with tired shoulders and hopeful faces, bringing their suitcases, their secrets, their small private dreams. He greeted each one with the same practiced courtesy, assigning rooms, giving directions, answering questions. His gaze weighed them without seeming to, noting who was alone,
This section
who was
required
easily
absolute
flattered,
precision,
who seemed
gentlemen.
unlikely
See to
to
it
be
personally.
missed.
Very good, sir.
As
And
evening
ensure that
deepened,
support is
the
placed
lamps
exactly
cast
as
a soft
indicated on
glow
page
over the
4. See
corridors.
this beam here?
Somewhere
They put it
outside,
in
the city
backwards.
roared
It's a
and
miracle it
clattered,
hasn't
but in here the
collapsed. Are you
noises
sure it
were
was an
muffled,
error, Mr.
controlled.
Jones? Perhaps
Doors
it was
closed,
intentional.
keys turned, footsteps faded. In the basement, the furnace sat dark and quiet, like a heart waiting for its first beat. Near midnight, a young woman he had charmed earlier hesitated at the front desk, asking one more question about a job he had mentioned. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty and trust in equal measure. Holmes smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting just enough, his tone gentle behind them. Part 2, The Mirror of Obsession. The city stretched wide beneath a low gray sky, restless with the sound of industry and rain. Smoke rolled from the chimneys, mingling with the mist, and the streets shimmered with a wet, metallic sheen. Inside the hotel, the air was still. Every creak of the wooden floors, every whisper of fabric against wallpaper, carried through the corridors like a held breath. Holmes moved through the building as if testing a machine he had built with his own bones.
No witness,
Each
no
hallway,
trace,
each
no
hidden
risk.
panel, each carefully disguised vent existed for a reason. The structure obeyed him. It listened. When he closed a door, the sound of the lock sliding into place gave him the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman finishing
Read
his
the
work.
evening news.
The
Horrible
young woman
murders
followed
in
him.
Whitechapel.
Her steps
Queen
were light,
Victoria visits the
uncertain.
hospital.
She had been told there might be a position available, something respectable, something steady. Her family lived miles away. She needed this chance. Holmes smiled, his voice calm and warm, a sound meant to put her at ease. He opened the door to a small room, bright and simple. Curtains drawn, a table near the wall, a single chair. He gestured for her to step inside. She hesitated for a moment, then did. The door closed softly behind her. In the moments that followed, time seemed to change texture. The hum of the city faded, replaced by the faint hiss of gas seeping through pipes hidden in the walls. She noticed the strange smell first, faint and sweet. She turned toward him,
Welcome to the
confusion
hotel.
tightening her
Your
expression.
room is ready.
He didn't
If you
speak.
take the elevator just
He
behind
watched
me
as
to the
realization
fourth floor,
formed in
it's
her
the first
eyes,
door on the left.
as panic began to rise. Her voice broke the silence for the first and last time. Downstairs in the basement, a thin plume of smoke rose from the furnace as he prepared for what came next. His movements were deliberate, efficient, as though performing a ritual that demanded precision. He opened the chute, waited for the sound, closed it again. Later, when the flames licked higher, he stood before the fire and felt a quiet peace spread through him.
Mr. Holmes? I could really
To
use
Holmes,
the
it was
word.
not
It
cruelty
is.
but order.
Be here at 8
Every
sharp.
trace of the woman, her voice, her scent, her fear, was erased by heat and smoke. What remained was balance. What had been uncertain was now resolved.
Rest assured,
He
the
wiped his
investigation
hands
is
on a clean
proceeding
cloth,
exactly as
folded it
planned.
carefully, and
You
returned
have nothing
upstairs.
to fear from me.
By morning, the room
We
was
should step
spotless.
into a private room
Sheets
to explain
replaced,
the
walls
opportunity in more
scrubbed.
detail.
To anyone
away
who looked,
from the
it
drafty
was as if no one
entrance.
had ever been there. Guests checked in and out, unaware that beneath their feet lay the faint scent of something that would never fade completely. Holmes greeted them with the same practiced kindness, his posture perfect, his tone unbroken. The mask held easily. Days turned into weeks, and the machine began to hum with its own rhythm. Every tenant, every guest, every transaction followed a pattern. Holmes refined the process, adjusting timing, studying reactions. He learned how to hide impatience behind politeness, how to offer comfort while measuring fear. He began to keep ledgers, not just of money, but of people. Names written neatly, dates recorded, notes added in the margins. Some names were crossed out, some were not. The building grew busier, its reputation spreading. Travelers came and went, drawn by convenience and the doctor's good manners. He watched them all. Some would vanish into the labyrinth and never be seen again. Others would leave unharmed, unaware of how close they had walked to the edge. To Holmes, each disappearance felt less like crime and more like maintenance. At night, when the city dimmed and the fairground lights flickered in the distance, he sometimes sat alone in the parlor, the ledger open before him. The ticking of the clock filled the room. His gaze drifted over the names, tracing letters as though touching the past. The first time, his hand had trembled. Now it did not. The body grows accustomed to what the mind justifies. One evening, a guest left behind a small piece of jewelry, a gold locket with initials engraved on its face. Holmes picked it up, turned it in his fingers, and paused. Inside was a photograph, a young woman standing by a riverbank, smiling. For a moment, something shifted behind his expression, a flicker of something that might have been memory or guilt, hard to tell. Then his eyes cleared, and the locket went into the drawer. Outside, thunder rolled across the rooftops. The storm gathered strength, rattling the glass panes. Holmes
Welcome
stood
to
at
the
the window,
hotel, Mr. and
watching
Mrs.
lightning flash
Here are
against
your
the wet
keys.
streets.
If you need anything,
In that
please let
brief
us know.
illumination,
Thank you very
his
much.
reflection stared
It
back.
looks wonderful.
Two figures overlapping, the doctor and the child. The man who built a kingdom of silence and the boy who once hid in a cellar, desperate to understand where pain ended and power began. The sound of the wind rose, howling through the chimneys. Somewhere deep within the building, a door shifted on its hinges. He turned from the window and listened. The house breathed. It was alive, bound to him, dependent on his will. Every creak, every whisper was proof that he controlled it, that nothing could escape him. But that night, as the storm battered the city, something unexpected stirred in the furnace room. A sound that didn't belong, the faint ring of metal against brick, like the echo of movement in a space that should have been still. He froze. The wind moaned through the corridors again, but this sound was different, softer, slower, almost human. He told himself it was the storm, just the storm. But when he closed his eyes, the rhythm continued, echoing the steady tap of the belt from long ago, the sound that once meant punishment and prayer. Holmes straightened his shoulders, reached for the lamp, and began his descent toward the basement. Part 3. The Collapse of Illusion. Dawn crept over the city in shades of iron and smoke. The fair had long since ended, the crowds scattered, the laughter dissolved into the noise of trains and commerce. The building stood unchanged,
Stillness he
tall and
once
pale
cherished
against the light, its windows
begun
dark
to
like watching
betray
eyes.
him.
Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and secrets. For months, tenants had disappeared, debts had multiplied, and the whispers had
Gentlemen,
grown
thank you
louder.
for coming.
The
I
doctor's
believe you have
charm had
news
begun to
regarding the Yard's
fray.
latest acquisition.
People who
Indeed,
once
Mr.
smiled
Holmes,
at him
it
now
appears
crossed the
retrieval was
street
not as
when he
straightforward
passed.
as anticipated.
His reflection in shop windows looked thinner, paler, the confidence hollowed from the
You know
eyes.
you were in the basement, Holmes?
In the basement, the furnace no longer burned as cleanly as before. The air shimmered with heat and the faint residue of chemicals. Holmes stood before the fire, its dull glow flickering across his face. His hand shook slightly as he added more fuel. He told himself the shaking was fatigue, nothing more. Yet somewhere deep inside, the stillness he once cherished had begun to betray him. Every sound, each morning he adjusted his collar, polished his shoes, and waited for trial. The courtroom filled with the curious and the horrified. Witnesses spoke, evidence was shown, diagrams of the building were unfolded like maps of a mind gone wrong. Through it all, Holmes listened with the calm of a man already beyond consequence. Only once did his composure falter, when a photograph was placed before him, a face he recognized. For a heartbeat, the confident mask slipped, revealing the flicker of the boy who once stared at a dead animal in a cellar, searching for meaning in the silence. Then the expression vanished, and the mask returned. The verdict came quickly. The sentence was death. When the final day arrived, the sky was clear and cold. Holmes, dressed with care, straightened his tie and thanked the guard who offered him breakfast. He declined to eat. As he walked down the corridor, the echo of his footsteps sounded measured, almost deliberate, as if he were walking through one of his own corridors for the last time. Witnesses later said he looked peaceful. Some called it arrogance, others thought it resignation. No one truly knew. What was certain was that the silence he had built, the one he believed would protect him, had become his only companion. Years later, the building was torn down. A new one rose in its place, ordinary and bright. Yet workers whispered that sometimes, late at night, the air inside grew strangely warm, as if remembering. And so the story remains, not just of a man who killed, but of a mind that mistook control for safety, order for redemption. The monster was not born from madness, but from fear, the same fear that hides quietly in everyone, the terror of being powerless. What truly makes a monster?